Hi, Karen. Thanks for coming on Digital Voices. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. It's gorgeous day outside and I'm finally feeling better. So that's good. I had a cold for a week with
Oh,
almost no voice. So our timing is good.
I also just got over a cold, so it's that time of year and the change of seasons. So, one of the things that will warm our listeners' day up with is stories about travel and stories about maybe a little better weather, something to look forward to here for the next
Right.
year. And maybe it'll inspire our listeners too to get off of their couches and armchairs, if you will, and venture past their backyards and experience a little bit of this on their own. So let me ask about your roots. Where are you from originally?
I'm from New York City. I was born and raised in Manhattan. So I'm one of the few Manhattanites who actually was born here.
Nice.
So very much a New Yorker.
Big family, small family?
Well, yeah, actually, a fairly. I have two brothers and lots of nieces and nephews and grandnieces and nephews. So lots of them all over the country.
Nice. And, growing up in New York, it's a big state. They often think of it as New York City. What part did you grow up in?
In Manhattan.
Okay.
Yeah, no,
Um,
I'm New York City kid, although I certainly know New York State very well. And it is not all Manhattan, and it is not all New York City, and part of it is very rural. It's an absolutely beautiful state,
Excellent.
apart from New York City.
Yeah. Well, I think New York has its allure, if you will, for a lot of people. So, growing up in Manhattan, how was that? Did you get exposed to a lot of professionalism? And how did that help shape you as a person growing up in that environment?
One of the things, and it's funny because I'm now writing this. Well, I have written a second book that's going to get published later this year, and the very first story in it is about growing up in the city and learning about the world because I lived in New York City. My mother had always wanted to travel, and she couldn't for lots of reasons. But New York City is so diverse, and even when I was growing up in the 50s, there were restaurants from all over the world. The museums are incredible and have collections of things from all over the world. And there were performances, and my mother loved music and dance, theater. And so we would go to puppet shows from Bali and, a dance company from Russia and, a music group, a folkloric music group from Mexico. And so I got exposed to a lot of the world without ever leaving Manhattan. And I have to say that it got me curious. And I think that was my mother's intent, was to get me very curious, and it worked. I wanted to go see these places now that I've been exposed to them.
Yeah, I I myself read a lot about ancient history and such, and that's one of the things that spurred me to travel. What about your experiences spurred you to travel?
Well, and we took some trips when I was a kid, but they were not, up to Canada. That was like really a foreign trip. But but when I was 17, and it's a very long story, so I'm not going to go into it, but I decided I had to get out of New York. And I was, because I'm a baby boomer and they were trying to get kids through the school system very, very quickly, I graduated high school when I was 15. Had
Wow.
my first year of college when I was 16. And it was a really bad year, and I needed to get out of New York. And I just decided I wanted to move to Europe. And I literally found a school that would accept me and went to an art school because I was an art major in the Netherlands. Hated the school, hated the school, but didn't want to come home. So I went to London. And in London, I fell into just an incredible situation where I was in a student hotel that had been taken over by the University of London as kind of extra dorm space because they were having the same boomer issue. And so I, within a week, had a slew of friends, all British, and they had told me about a university that might accept me, which they did. And after that, I realized I could go anywhere. And travel was really cheap back then if you were a student. I could go away for a weekend to Paris and spend $50, and that's not an exaggeration, and stay at perfectly acceptable places, youth hostels and such. And so I got used to really travel.
So
And
let me ask a little bit about that. Was that due to the light rail system in Europe?
no, I could actually fly. There were flights. You could get last minute flights that were, if you go to Paris, $10 or $15, or you
Oh,
could take a
wow.
ferry. It was ridiculously cheap. I mean, I'm not joking when I say $50, and I would stay in a youth hostel and eat, go to the grocery store and buy something and eat that because I honestly didn't care. And I was on a real budget. So
Speaking of the hostels, before we started our podcast today, we touched a little bit on stereotypes and images of what things are supposed to be like, and then the reality once you get there. Why don't you talk a little bit about your hostel experiences and how those are a real typically safe way for students to kind of stay in vacation spots, if you will, along with people their own age?
yeah, absolutely. American Youth Hostel Association still exists. And I had my card, and that was my ticket to go everywhere. And they are absolutely safe, and they have very strict rules about when you can come in, and how late and all of that kind of thing. So it's a little bit, you know, you're in a dorm. Um, but I never had any trouble at all. I met people from all over the world, which was incredible. Again, I wrote a chapter about being in Zurich and running into this group of Swedish students and spending a weekend with them. We all got drunk as skunks most of the weekend, but that's another story. But we had a fabulous time. And, in other places, I ran into people from Asia and Africa. And so it's a way not only of having cheap accommodations, but of meeting other travelers from all over the world. And everybody wants to talk and compare notes and where did you go? And gee, you got there. How expensive is that? And how did you manage to? So everybody's trading information. And if you're a solo traveler, as I was, you can almost always find someone that you can pair up with to go places so that you don't have to feel alone. And then if you don't like them, you just move on, or you say, tomorrow I'm going to go do whatever I'm going to go do. But I've had people who I've met at youth hostels who I ended up spending a week with or a couple of weeks with. And you just don't know. But in truth, I've never felt unsafe. Um, Mind you, this was many years ago. Um, but my understanding is because I have nieces and nephews who've traveled and they have had the same experience more recently. So I think it is a safe.
I think so too. I've also stayed in hostels, and I think the experience that I had was amazing. You touched on one of the things that I was going to point out, which is the ability to connect with others in the same situation as yourself creates a kinship. And I'm sure that a lot of the people that you've met on your travels, you have developed lifelong friendships with, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's really an amazing experience. Any parents out there that are contemplating if your son or daughter is going to travel and do maybe a school project or study abroad, the ideas that we carry that we're raised with are often different than the reality of the situation. And as you can hear through Karen's experiences, this has influenced and helped shape her life in such a profound way that it's really amazing for these experiences for all individuals.
And it also gives you an incredible amount of self-confidence
Absolutely.
because you go out into the world and you realize you can do this by yourself, or if you're with a friend, that you can navigate places. I went when I was in college. When I came back to the U.S., I went to college, and during the summer, I went to Japan. didn't speak a word of Japanese, absolutely not a word. And I was a ceramic student, which surprises everybody, but I was a ceramic student. And so I was going to ceramic studios all over the world. I mean, but in Japan specifically, all over the country, in very remote areas where absolutely no one speaks English. And I managed to get around, got lost a couple of times, but so what? We stayed in youth hostels frequently. People they were beyond gracious and tried to help us in any way they could, despite the fact that they spoke no English. And we managed to get around. And after that, it had two impacts, one good, one not so good. The first good one was I had the confidence to go anywhere on the globe, whether I spoke the language or not. And I never, ever was concerned about it. And now with all the apps that do the translation for you, it's really a piece of cake. But
Yeah.
the other, yeah, I mean, it was quite something. The bad part of it was is I never felt the need to learn another language. I mean, I speak Spanish, from high school, and I can speak Spanish like a not too bright 5-year-old. Um, I can tell you about today. Don't ask me about tomorrow or yesterday because I don't know any of the tenses. Um, but but enough so I can communicate. But that's it. I never learned another language, and that I wish I had done. But
Well, as long as you have the important ones down, like un poco tequila, por favor.
yeah, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But you touched on a tool that's come out in recent years, which is this active live translation. Google obviously has their Google Translator, but there's actually devices now that in real time translate a variety of different languages. And so you
Yep.
don't have that inconvenience of typing something into your phone or something along those lines. And it's becoming so fluid that, like you said, you don't necessarily have to learn the other language these
Right.
days.
It's like
Um,
Star Trek,
yeah, it really is.
you
It's
know, Star
it's
Trek come to
amazing.
life.
I like the aspect of that though, because instead of having a language barrier, we're able to get to know each other more personally as a result of that technology. My hope is that as the years continue on a global level, we realize how similar we all are. And it's often the governments, not to get political about things, that
Oh yeah.
cause the mischief and the grief, if you will. People, especially in America or anywhere else you go, if you find someone that's hurting or needs help, every country has this universal uh, part of them in terms of being human, and that's we offer a helping hand. We help our neighbors. We help support each other, and I think that's really an important thing because that's a connection that it doesn't matter if you're from Europe or Asia or America or Canada. That's a universal trait and quality of people. It makes us human. And I think that's an important realization that I came away with.
Well, and I think the other piece that people don't necessarily get is that people are very generous and really want to help, and they are as curious about you as you are about them.
Yep.
And if you are not in one of the things I always joke about is that people come to New York and they think New Yorkers are rude. And I say, yeah, they were in Times Square at the Statue of Liberty and at all these tourist places where New Yorkers don't go. And all the other tourists are frustrated and they're waiting on lines. And of course, they're rude. And New Yorkers just avoid those places. You come into a neighborhood in New York City, any neighborhood, and people will help you. They will go out of their way to help you. And I live in an apartment building. It's like a village. And everybody knows everybody. And last week I said I wasn't feeling well and I have a dog and I really couldn't get out and walk the dog. I had people signing up, I'll take him out, I'll take him out, I'll take him out, I'll take him out. But that happens everywhere. And it's I've had people invite me to dinner. I've had people take me on tours. I was working one night in Ireland and I couldn't get a taxi back from where I was to my hotel. And a woman saw me and said, "Oh, you look like you're having troubles. Can I help you?" And I explained. she said, "Oh, come on, I'll take you there." It was totally out of her way. And she gave me a tour of the city because she was just, you can't be stranded out there. Let me help you. And I've had things like that happen constantly. I mean, I could give you 25 examples off the top of my head of that kind of thing happening.
And I bet you that was a much better experience than someone that does that for a living, in my opinion. So, I went to Greece and I had a similar experience. You could have regular tour guides, give you the tour of the Acropolis, but they also had locals that were also trying to do that as well. I ended up getting with a local, an older gentleman. He was so animated and passionate and knew the history of the island and the area so well that in my opinion, I felt like he was probably a better tour guide than the ones that were employed by the Acropolis. And I ended up making friends with this gentleman and got dinner with him and got to know a little
Yeah.
bit about him and his family. These experiences have shaped my life, and they've shaped yours. In fact, you mentioned a little while ago that you started writing, and I wanted to get into this as a transition. So you have your first book, which is Travel Mania: Stories of Wanderlust, correct?
Correct.
And then you have a second one that's about to be released.
That's
Uh,
correct.
what's the name of that one?
That one is, and I always get it wrong. The first part of it is Wanderlust, and then it's got this long subhead after it. Um, Curious places, quirky people, and no, it's something. It's places, people, and food, essentially, but with some. You'd think I would learn that already. I've had written it 20 times, but it's Wanderlust, essentially. And what this is about is I actually have gotten a huge following of people who have read the book and who have been following my posts on Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram. And they started talking to me about, you've got to have great food stories, write about food. And then I would say something about some people that I had met along the way. Oh, you got to write about that person. And so what I decided was I would write stories that were really focused on very unusual places, like a town that I visited in the middle of Australia that we flew into on a four-seater plane that has a population of 20. And it's an opal mining town. And they build their houses underground because it's cooler, because in the summer it gets to like 130 degrees. And I've never been anywhere like that, nor will I ever be again. But it is one of the quirkiest places I've ever been to. And then just people who I've met who have, in one way or another, really impacted either the way I think about things or who just left a huge impression on me. I was, I did went to a lot of the national parks, and in the Devil's Tower, I drove in and I had a tent with me, but I was by myself and I didn't really want to put the tent up. And they said, "Oh, we have cabins. It's $10 a night for the cabin." Oh, well, perfect. I'll go into the cabin. And as soon as I got to the door, these two women show up and they're dusty and they're, full of, anyhow, turns out that they were repairing all the cabins in this campsite. And we got into a conversation. I ended up having dinner with them and breakfast with them. And they were telling me that they had made a career out of repairing cabins in all over the country, in national parks, in private campgrounds, and that it was a way for them to see the country while they worked. And I was fascinated by this. And I said, "Well, where do you live?" "Well, in our camper." And they were sisters. And I said, "Yeah, but don't you have a home?" "Well, we occasionally go back to visit our mom, and she's really good about taking care of things for us." And they had developed this nomadic lifestyle and were earning money doing it. And I said, "Well, what do you do for vacation?" "Oh, we go back to a park that we really, really liked, and we hang out there for a couple of weeks without working." And I thought, what a great way to live.
Yeah, So for you, writing helped to support this travel addiction that you self-admittedly have.
Yeah, um, partially. And I now am writing a column for a women for it's called Journey Woman, which is a magazine, an online magazine for female travelers. And I'm writing for another, so I'm writing for several places, and it all started because I started writing the book and you know, getting on people's radar.
I know that myself, when I look back, it almost looks like, I don't know if you're religious or not, but it almost looks like a plan has been laid out for me as I look back, how I was introduced to certain people. I might have went on a trip at a certain time that coincided, like I went to Rome on the year of Jubilee and was there at the Vatican when they opened up the iron doors once every 25 years. But
Right,
I didn't plan that. I just happened to be there. Same thing happened at Chichen Itza with the fall equinox with the shadow of the snake.
right.
And some of the people that I've met have, it's almost beyond coincidence, the type of people and how they help shape the experience. Looking back at your own travels and your own experiences, have you come away with a feeling like that? Like, wow, this is all almost seems like it was laid out for me, if you will.
Well, I'm going to give you the flip side of that one,
Okay.
which is I have been near some terrifying experiences. Not in them, but I was in Denali Park in Alaska, and we had yet to see Denali. We had not seen the mountain, and it was my last day there. And you have to get into where you start hiking around, and you take a bus in. That's the only way you can get in. And there were two buses coming back. And I said, well, you think we should wait? Maybe it'll clear up. And the person I was with said, nah, it's not going to. Let's just take this bus. I'm tired. We've been hiking all day. Okay. We take the bus. As we are coming out of the park, emergency vehicles go screaming in the other way. I mean, really, just one after another. Ambulances, police. Turns out that the bus behind us had pulled over to stop to see a bear, and the entire side of the mountain had given out, and the bus tumbled down. And about half the people on the bus died, and the other ones were medevaced to hospitals because they were so seriously injured. And and you go, huh, somebody's really looking out for me.
Right.
I could have been on that bus. I was in Russia, and I was staying at a hotel and using a particular subway station every day to get places. The day after I left, it was at the time of all of the Chechen rebellions. They blew up that train station.
Oh,
Day after I left. And you go, wow, I could so easily have been there.
right.
And things like that happen, and you go, okay, I mean, it could have happened in New York. Things happen in New York all the time. But somehow it seems like somebody's watching out because there have been any number of those very, very close calls. And those are just two, and I can give you again a list because if you
Yeah.
travel enough, those things happen. On the flip side, I've also had some of these just magical moments. You said Chichen Itza, and I was down in the Yucatan right at the time, and I had no idea that it was the time when the monarch butterflies are doing their migration.
Hmm.
And I see this, it looks like a moving cloud, kind of at eye level. Get out of the car, and I was like, oh my God. I mean, millions of them. I couldn't even fathom what I was seeing, particularly because I had no idea that it was the right season for it. And so things like that happen, and you just kind of, this is just so
For
spatial.
for our listeners that don't know, monarch butterflies migrate, and so they fly from as far up as Wisconsin, where I live, all the way down to the Yucatan area to this typically just a forest preserve, isn't it?
Yes.
That's left, where they gather in the millions, and it's an amazing thing. Monarch butterflies have also been listed as endangered now, which is really unfortunate. And I realize myself, I've been planning on trying to get down to see that migration because I might not be here forever. And so, our listeners that are interested in something like that, definitely do your research, plan a trip, and help support the monarch butterflies. But it's an amazing experience.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It was just, you don't even know how to describe it. And no photograph does it justice. This is one of those you have to experience it in person. And
I
there's a
agree.
lot of those, I might add.
I agree. So, one other thing I wanted to ask you about is takeaways. You've traveled so much. We are raised with a stereotype, as I mentioned earlier, of what things might be like. Once we leave our backyards and actually go experience that, we often find out that the reality doesn't match that stereotype. Are there any big ones that stuck out or stick out to you that you were surprised about when you actually
Oh yeah.
got there and experienced it?
Oh yeah. One of them is we think as Americans that we are in the lead in everything. And trust me, I am a good American and I wouldn't live anywhere else. People have said that to me. Well, where would you live? Here. But there are countries that are so far ahead of us technologically that it is astounding. And the first time I went to South Korea, which was 12 years ago, things that we are just doing now, they were already doing. I can remember walking into a restaurant trying to pay for a cup of coffee with cash. And the woman looked at it and looked at me like, what is this stuff and what are you doing? Everybody paid for everything with a phone 12 years ago. They had apps then. Every subway, and they have one of the biggest subway systems on the planet. Every subway system has perfect Wi-Fi, had 12 years ago, and you could get anywhere. I had an app that you couldn't get lost. There was no possibility. So that's one piece of it. Another piece of it is that no matter where you go, and I've been to 90 countries, so I say this with a great deal of confidence. Wherever you go, people basically want exactly the same things. They want to have a good life. They want to have enough food. They want to have shelter. They want to have an education for their children. They want their children to do well. That does not differ, and I don't care what country you go to. And people are generous. They're generous with their time. They're generous with what they have, even to people they do not know. And I have experienced that in so many times that it's become, I don't even question it. And of course, my response to that is living in New York. The second I see someone who I think is lost, I go over and say, "Can I help you?" I mean, it's just like ingrained into me. But everywhere you go, people basically want the same thing. And people have enthusiasms for the same things, though they're played out in different ways. So you're going to find sports enthusiasts in every country, but they may play different games than we play. Or they might play the same things and are even crazier about it than we are. In Cuba, baseball is king, and the minute you say baseball, they are beside themselves. Same thing in Japan. The Japanese love basubaru, and they are crazy for it. But in other countries, it's cricket or it's whatever it is. Absolutely everywhere. You're going to find people who love music. The music is going to be different, but there are going to be people who love music and food and dance and theater and racing, whatever it is, but it's done in different ways. And part of what's so interesting is finding out in what ways they do the same things.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not much of a sports enthusiast, I will confess, but I have been to cricket matches and I've been to football, as they call it, soccer matches all over the globe. I've been to all kinds of weird sporting events just because it's fun to watch the people and how they respond to it. I will try and eat almost anything. There are a couple of times I've kind of not quite managed to swallow. There's a few things that I was like, "Ugh." That's really out of my comfort zone, but basically not. And I will try almost anything. And you'd be surprised because sometimes things that you think, oh my God, no, and they're wonderful. And
Well, I know that a couple things I could see some memories lighting up your eyes.
oh yeah,
What share a couple of those experiences with us, if you would?
there's a fruit in Southeast Asia called durian,
Hmm.
and durian is known as the stinky fruit. And there are signs in hotels that will say no stinky fruit allowed. You walk into a market, you can smell this stuff from 100 yards away. It is such a powerful smell. And I've been to Southeast Asia quite a number of times, and I avoided it for years. I was like, there is no way I'm eating that. Finally, I was in a market, and one of the sellers just insisted that I try a piece. And he was such a sweet guy, and he was so nice about it. Okay. So I held my breath and, I held my nose and I took a bite. It's delicious. It's creamy. It's like custard. It's really sweet, but the smell of it could kill you. It's like the worst, smelliest cheese you had ever smelled in your life, or
Well, and
dirty feet.
it's a texture thing too. Like you mentioned, it's kind of a custardy.
It's
Um,
custardy.
yeah. So between the texture of it and the smell of it, how did you find the flavor to be satisfying?
It's yeah, it's a very mild, sweet taste.
Hmm,
It has nothing to do with the smell at all.
interesting.
Yeah.
Usually
And
I can almost figure out what something's going to taste like just by the smell.
yeah,
So it's funny that that doesn't follow that rule.
no, no, not at all. And I couldn't figure out why anybody would eat this stuff. And then I tried it and it was like, I mean, it's not my favorite fruit and I wouldn't go crazy looking for it, but I was glad that I tried it. Um, on the reverse side of that, in Japan, there is a ceremonial tea that I got served more times than I care to tell you. Every time I went to a ceramic studio. And then later on, I was in the business world and I would go to meetings and I would get served this tea. And it looks gorgeous. It's a chartreuse color and it's very foamy and it looks like it should be sweet and really luscious. What it tastes like is biting into an unripe persimmon and your entire mouth goes, it's like you pucker your mouth because it is so astringent and you have to drink the whole thing. It would be considered the height of being rude not to, because this is a ceremonial offering. Every time I saw it after the first time, I was like, oh, no, no, again. It was like, you really want me to drink that? But you do. So that was the reverse one, which is it looks great and it tastes absolutely beyond awful. And then in Peru, I have to tell you one more.
No,
In Peru, I actually was in several people's homes, and in their kitchens, they have guinea pigs running around, live guinea pigs. And they are eventually eaten, called kuyo, as it's for really festive meals. And I was with a guide at one point, and he said, oh, let's go for lunch. I'll order for you. And they came out with kuyo, with this little thing that looks like a rat with its little beady eyes and its face looking at me, smiling. And I'm going, I can't eat this. I just can't eat this. I'm sorry. I can't eat something that's staring at me. Oh, no, don't worry. We'll go cut it up for you. So they cut it up and they bring it back, but they have not taken the head off. So there's still this eye staring at me. And I took one bite and I said, that's it. I'm done. I'm not eating any more of this. I have tried kuyo. I never need to eat it again.
You touched on customs. I know in China and Japan, and I might be off on the country, but tea isn't just about drinking tea. It's the act of making it. It's very cultural and symbolic. Can you talk a little bit about uh, maybe other countries that are like that, and maybe even just describe what I'm trying to describe a little better?
Yeah. Um, in both China and Japan, and those are the two where I've seen it most often, there's a whole ritual and ceremony for preparing the tea and serving it. And it includes grinding the tea and blending the tea and how you boil the water and the pot you use to put it in and how much you stir it or you don't stir it and how long you let it steep and how you drain it so you don't get the leaves in it and then how you present it to people. And a true tea ceremony could take a half an hour. That is ceremonial. Most people, you want a cup of tea, you have a cup of tea, but no one in those countries would even consider a tea bag. That's like, you do not drink tea from a tea bag. It is always loose tea and it's always prepared very carefully, even if it's just in your home. Um, it's the equivalent here of somebody who, I mean, I make coffee every morning. I don't grind my own beans, but I put them in and I pour the water and and I go through a whole little ritual of my own. Yeah. And um, and that's the way tea is certainly in most Asian countries. And the variety of teas is the other thing that astounded me. I went into a tea shop in China, in Beijing, and the woman spoke no English, but I was curious and she could see. So she was giving me tastes and preparing it. Actually, I was with a friend, so she was giving it for the two of us. And we must have tried 20 different kinds of tea, including things like chrysanthemum tea, which looks like a dried up chrysanthemum. And then they put it in water and it opens up. So you have a flower in this
Wow.
cup and it tastes of chrysanthemum. And it never even occurred to me that one could drink chrysanthemum without dying. I didn't know if it was poisonous or not. Well, it's not, or certain varieties. And it was delicious and it's beautiful, and it was not anything I'd ever seen. And she was showing us, you have to use this kind of cup with this kind of tea and this kind of cup with this kind of tea. And there's different shapes and different sizes. And it's a real science as well as an art.
Yeah. And appreciating those things as a traveler is important to our hosts, as you also kind of alluded to as well. To deny or say no thank you to something like that would be considered kind of offensive to
Yes.
those people. Um, so for any of our travelers that are maybe going to a new place other than China and Japan, are there other countries that come to mind that have customs that maybe travelers should be aware of?
I'm sure there are. I have to think about it a little bit.
No
But
problem.
but most countries, um, you can tell if they're doing something ritual. It becomes obvious fairly quickly. One of the things that I always say to somebody who's a prospective traveler is don't talk a lot, listen and watch. And listen and watch and ask questions. If they want to know about you, they'll ask. And you will be surprised how much you'll pick up. You need to be a good observer.
Yeah, I think you hit that on the head. Absolutely. Talk a little bit about your books. So your first one kind of uh, was a combination of you traveling at that time, starting to write, a little bit of kind of empowerment of women per se.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and I think what I'd like to know more about is the specifics, like what readers can come away with from that first book, and also the second one that's coming out. What types of things are you focusing on with that?
The first book the best compliment, well, I've gotten two just incredible compliments, many actually, but two that stand out. One of them was someone who I did not know, read the book, fell in love with it, wrote to me, then sent out for the holidays. She bought 12 copies and sent it to all of her friends, to a bunch of friends, because she thought it was great. And she wanted them to travel because she's a big traveler. And she said to me, three of them took trips based on what they read in my book, which was exactly what I wanted. I really want to inspire people to get out and go see the world. It's such a fascinating place. It will change you so much, and you will be the better for it. So that was one. And then another one was from someone who is was a writing instructor of mine who really dislikes travel. And he said, I read your book and I bought a ticket. And I, really? He said, yeah, I did. I said, I read about, I don't even remember where it was. He said, but I decided I really had to go see that for myself. And so it was, that's the kind of thing that I would love to have people take away from it. And it's also the kind of book that if you have traveled, you don't have to read it in order. You can say, gee, I've been in the Netherlands. I want to read about the Netherlands. Or I've been in Montana. I want to read about Montana, or whatever it is. And, see what you saw that I didn't see. And so a lot of people read it that way. They eventually get through the whole book, but they read it kind of in chunks. And it's the kind of book that, you can put down and pick it up 2 weeks later, and so what? But I think the main thing that I want people to come away with, if nothing else, is go out and see the world. Just go out and see the world. And the world doesn't have to be China. Go to somewhere in your own state that you've never been to. Go explore. We started with talking about New York. During the pandemic, when I really couldn't fly overseas, I was taking road trips and I saw more of New York and New England than I'd seen in a while. And I've seen a lot of it prior to that. But I was taking trips constantly and I never ran out of places, ever. And I keep reading about other places that are within driving distance that I will go to. So go explore. It does not have to be around the world.
Absolutely. I had a thought just now. The getting out of your backyard idea. When you look at Europe, the cultures and languages that developed over there, country in Europe, for our listeners who might not have been there, a lot of them are the size of the state or maybe even smaller within America. But yet they have their own language, their own culture. But going back, you had a horse to get around on, right? So it was difficult to reach those distances, and thus you develop these pockets of culture. The same thing is kind of true within America, depending on East Coast, West Coast, Midwest, South. There's different cultural things that you can experience even here in our own home country that a lot of us haven't gone out to explore. And just like you mentioned earlier, the foods, traditions, they might vary quite a bit depending on the region of the US or even within Europe or another country that you might want to mention. But I think that for me is the thing that's so alluring. If you just want to experience life, like you said, you don't have to necessarily go to a different country. You can just take a drive and experience some new things on your own turf, if you will.
Absolutely. And within this country, the food varies widely. Yeah, there's McDonald's everywhere, but you're not going to get the same food up in Maine that you are in Louisiana or that you are in Mississippi or in the state of Washington.
Mm-hmm.
And very, very different, and equally good, but very different.
And it just opens up the doors to meeting new people and making new friends and opening yourself up rather than keeping ourselves kind of closed off as a lot of us often do in front of the television and just
Yeah.
it's to work and back. And oftentimes, because life becomes so busy, in my opinion, I think that we often forget to stop and smell the roses.
Yeah.
And even just taking a trip, like you said, within your own state and experiencing what it is to be a New Yorker or a Wisconsinite, or, um, it's just it's a fulfilling and richer experience for having done those things.
Yeah. And one of the things that I say for people who are nervous about it is pick something you really are interested in. It can be sports, it can be nature, it can be art, it can be music. I don't care what it is. Go read up in local publications what's going on there.
Mm.
Or if you're into music, see where there are music festivals. See where they're going to be playing whatever, and go search out, because what's going to happen is when you get there, you're surrounded by people who are interested in the same thing. So it's really easy to start a conversation.
Give
And I
us a
suggest
taste.
that all the time.
Sorry, give us a taste of that second book. What kind of things we're going to be looking forward to there.
Yep. As I said before, it's people, places, and food. And lots of very interesting people, some of whom have very sad endings, a couple of which kind of shocked me. Um, Places I mentioned, the Australian outback, and that was, certainly one of the stranger places I have ever been to. But also going to somewhere like Dubai, where it's like Disneyland meets I don't know what. It doesn't feel real. Fascinating, but it doesn't feel. And then food. We were just talking about food, both the best and worst meals I've ever had, and learning about something. Now, you're talking at the very beginning about what your expectations are and how they change. Now, I was pretty young at the time, but my grandmother used to make something that she called strudel. It was the worst thing you have ever eaten in your life. The dough was rubbery. She would put apricot jam on it, roll it up, it would ooze out and burn. And if you ate it more than 15 minutes after it came out of the oven, it was like a rock. Okay, so now I'm in Vienna, and we go into Cafe Mozart, which we've been told is this just beautiful, beautiful cafe. And we go, and there's the most gorgeous looking desserts you've ever seen in a display case. We sit down and we start to order, what would you like? And well, I don't know. And he says, oh, you must have, the Apfelstrudel. It's our specialty. And I'm thinking to myself, apple strudel, no, 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 no. But okay, it's their specialty. I'll try it. How bad could it? Can't be worse than my grandmother's. It was the most delicious thing I'd ever tasted. It was revelatory. It was like, oh my God, this is apple strudel. Got it. I know why people like this. And I mean, that's an extreme example, but it was absolutely life altering because I had had many other things that she cooked that were god awful, but that one had stuck in my mind as being, there is no way this could ever be something anybody would want to eat. So,
The thing that I was most surprised about when I first started traveling are the croissants in the Netherlands and Paris. I'm used to having croissants here in the States. They're so dry and flavorless. It was almost its own food group. It was so good.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I wish I could find something like that here in the States, but I don't know. They must use some old world magic or something like that. There's something going on there that's definitely
Yeah.
magical.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, it's like bagels in New York. If you're a New Yorker, bagels anywhere else on the globe are not bagels. They just aren't.
Yeah.
Same thing with croissants. You got to be in Paris.
So let me ask you, and this might be a little personal. As you're getting older, as you're traveling slowed, and on the flip side of that, people that are older, should they be discouraged from traveling or should they be encouraged to travel?
Well, thank you. You've just introduced, I'm writing my third book, and it is about exactly that, which is what happens as you get older and how travel changes. And I've been interviewing a bunch of people I know, and my own stories. And you shouldn't be discouraged. You can always find a way to travel. Um, I have friends who went to Costa Rica, I think, and they decided, and they're older than I am, and I'm in my 70s. So we're not talking about spring chickens here. And they decided that they were going to go on a zip line. And they did it. And it was a very, very long zip line. And they got to the end and they said, oh, good, we can cross that off our bucket list. And thank God we never have to do it again. Um, so, you set limitations for yourself about what you will and will not do. I will never go on a zip line. I hate heights. So it's not anything I'm going to be doing, but I wouldn't have done that 30 years ago. So it doesn't make any difference. Um, but what I find is that now, particularly because I've traveled so much, I focus on the things I'm really interested in. I don't feel like I have to see everything. I buy almost no souvenirs. I live in an apartment. I buy some gifts, but you know what? I don't need anything else. I don't want anything else. I take a zillion photographs and I pace myself. Um, as it happens, I'm going to be leaving in 10 days to go down to Buenos Aires, and then I am getting on a cruise ship and going down to Antarctica. And just happened. And I thought, you know what? I don't know if I'm going to want to do this 5 years from now. If I can do it now, I'm doing it. And so you do what you can do when you can do it. And I expect to be traveling for the rest of my life. And when I can't, I've joked with everybody, by then virtual reality will be incredible and I will travel the world on virtual reality. But I'm
I
not
like that.
stopping. But I'm not
I like
stopping.
that. No, I feel the same way. And I think you also touched on something that's important. A lot of us, when we start traveling, we pack our vacations full of so much that when you come home, it's almost a need to decompress. And you need to take a vacation from your vacation is a
Yes.
statement I use a lot. Um, but I think as I've traveled more, as yourself have alluded to, you slow down and start to enjoy where you're at rather than shoving all of these things into the short time that you have there. I think that's a more enriching experience and
Yeah.
allows you to kind of settle into where you're visiting more than just surface level sometimes as we usually do.
Yeah.
Do you agree with
I
that?
mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, to me, excuse me, I was in London over the holidays, and I lived in London, so I know the city very well. I have a lot of friends there, and I spent most of my time either hanging out with friends, going to the theater, going to a couple of museums, or sitting in a cafe and people watching. That's how I spent my vacation, and it was a real vacation.
The simple things that we don't always think about right away. And
Yeah,
those are things that I've learned along the travel uh, scape that I've done. And I think those are important tidbits for our listeners to stop and smell the roses, enjoy where you're at, immerse yourself as much as possible within the local customs or within the local culture. I think is important to experience that as well. Unless you're going somewhere to see something in particular, make sure you do that, but also make sure you get some flavors of the culture and the city and the culture that you're in.
yeah. I would say, pick one or two things each day that you really want to do,
Mm.
and that's it. Because I've seen people who have itineraries, and I look at it and go, "You're going to be so exhausted. You're not going to remember anything you saw. You're not going to actually experience it because you're rushing through to get to the next thing. Slow down."
I've had travel companions that have an itinerary and it's listed, da 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 da. And that's hard for me, who's a free spirit that just kind of wants to immerse myself to get, you know, in a compatibility with. Um, so before I let you go, obviously you're going to be going to Antarctica. I think that's amazing. Um, any, I find that I walked away with a few stories that are just unbelievable. Share some tidbits that you've experienced, if you
Oh God, I don't know. You know where to begin.
would.
I mean, seriously, I don't know where to begin. Um, I, I can't answer this. That's like the question, what's your favorite country? And my answer is always wherever I'm going next. I the
let
world
me
is just so incredible.
let, let
A
me toss a
tidbit.
couple let me toss a couple things at you. Maybe that'll spur, a memory or two. So I have like the top three or four. Um, I had a really close encounter with a shark in Jamaica. Had a bull shark that swam underneath me, well larger than I was. That's one. Met a Hollywood film actress on the Acropolis while I had my camcorder. So that was another amazing experience. Um, and the solstice and the Rome thing for the year of Jubilee. Um, Go ahead. Does that inspire a memory or two?
Okay. Um, Being in Alaska at solstice and having the sun never set.
Mm,
I mean, I watched the sun dip. It never went completely down and then come right back up. It was right at solstice and I was way north. Um, I used to rent a house with a group of friends on Crete in Greece.
mm,
And we went there every other summer for 8 summers. And it was a tiny village. There were about 500 people, no hotels. And we rented this house. And when we would come into town, we would get greeted with, "Oh, it's the Americans, they're back." And it was such a great feeling to be halfway around the world in this little teeny town and have all these people remember us and fondly remember us. And we're really happy we had come back. So I would say that was another one. God, being in a Maasai village in Tanzania, actually the whole trip to Tanzania, seeing animals that I'd only ever seen in a zoo out in the wild. I climbed Kilimanjaro, which was amazing. And the other piece of it was that we stayed outside of a Maasai village and we got to know them. And again, total language barrier, but I had a drawing pad. So I sat there with a little girl and I drew a picture of my house. And then she drew a picture of her house. And then I drew a picture of my dog and she drew a picture of her cow. I mean, it was incredible. Here I am again in the wilds of nowhere having a really, really incredible experience with a group of people with whom I should have zero in common. And yet clearly we did.
yeah. Last thing I wanted to ask you, because I saw it written in something that you wrote, is about the loves that you've come across while traveling. I also have found a few of those myself. Um, Talk about the culture. Crete brought that to mind for me. Italians and Greeks are notorious for their suaveness or their suave ways.
Right.
um, Talk a little bit about your experiences of love on the road.
Um, People, well, whoops. Can you hang on? I hate to do
No,
this.
go ahead. I can always edit this.
Okay. Hi there. I'm a little bit late. I was just going to text you. 10 minutes? Nope, 10 minutes. Okay, bye.
Sorry, I didn't mean to keep you this long.
Yeah.
I've been
Um,
enjoying our talk.
yeah. So I went to Indonesia on my own. And when I got there, people would start to have conversations with me, and they all wanted to practice English. That's the other thing. All around the world, anybody who studied English wants to practice it. And the first thing they would say is, where are you from? Then, are you married and do you have children? And I would say, no, I'm single. That was the wrong answer. That was like the end of the conversation. It was just unbelievable. So after this had happened a few days, I went out and I bought a wedding band, put it on my hand. They would ask me, say, yes, I'm married and I have 2 children. That was great. Then we could have a great conversation. They so did not understand the concept of someone being single that it was unbridgeable. And that surprised me. But once I was married and had kids, life was wonderful. You know,
Interesting how that works.
yeah.
Some of the places that I've been, a lot of your writing is focused towards women, it sounds like. One of the
No,
things,
not really.
I apologize for that. What I wanted to point out, though, is that I guess women should be more aware when they travel. For instance, Jamaica, the first thing they're going to try to do is, if you're single, they want to hook up and they want to come to the States. That's a big thing that I've seen a lot, and I've spent a lot of time down there. Other countries, I'm sure, have their own thing, as you just alluded to. Anything that brings to mind that we just want to alert people of, when you're traveling, be aware of this or that, or
Don't stand out. Don't wear fancy clothes, fancy jewelry. If you're in a Muslim country, dress appropriately. If you're in a Buddhist country and they go into the temples wearing a temple skirt, wear a temple skirt. Watch and observe and do what people want you to do in order to be respectful. And that's really important. No matter where you go, if you will make yourself a target, if you are flashing jewelry. Phones are great now. They take terrific pictures. Use that. Don't carry around an expensive camera. And just be a little bit street smart. Be aware of your surroundings. With all the traveling I've done, I've only gotten robbed once, and that was in Japan, which surprises everybody. I was in a huge temple with crowds of people. I had my wallet stolen. Fortunately, the only things in it were a few yen, and a credit card, one credit card. That's the other thing, is don't carry all your credit cards with you. If you're going to be somewhere, put it in the safe. Carry one with you. Don't ever carry your passport with you. Leave it in a safe. And of course, they couldn't use it because nobody in Japan was going to get away. And this was years ago, before much of the online shopping. But you couldn't use it because who in Japan has the name Gershowitz, for God's sakes? It's not very likely anybody could use it. So it was not a big deal. But that is the only time. And it's mostly because I'm pretty street smart about it.
yeah, just being aware, and protecting yourself anywhere you go. Doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad spot, but you might be in an area of the city that might not be all the greatest. So,
Yeah.
well, Karen, I really appreciate your time today. Listeners, you can take a look for her book, Travel Mania: Stories of Wanderlust. And her next book is going to be released when?
October 3rd.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
October 3rd.
October 3rd. And the name of that one is
Wanderlust. I have to write it out. This is
No Problem.
embarrassing.
I appreciate the time that you spent with me today. I think we definitely gathered some good nuggets of knowledge and some good stories as well. I wish you nothing but success and continue to travel. I think the stories that you're sharing and the things that you're taking away are just amazing. So thank you.
You're more than welcome. It was great fun talking with you.
Likewise. You have yourself a great day.
Thanks, you too.